Hi, Alice.
Now, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you to R & Company for hosting our talk today. My name is Alice Stori Liechtenstein. I'm a design curator, and I'm happy to be chatting today with designer Katie Stout. Welcome here. So actually, the really nice thing is that, Katie, as you probably remember, it was Evan and Sesti who first introduced your work to me and brought me brought you to my attention. So I think I'm particularly grateful to them because not only have we worked together in the past years, but we've also become very good friends. So that's something which I thought it would be nice to mention. I'm very happy about.
Thank you, Evan and Zesty, for bringing Alice into my life.
So the way we're going to do the talk today, Katie and I have decided we're going to be throwing questions at each other, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the collaboration that we had last year at Schloss Holleneck, and how she was a designer in residence and did a project on the theme of table manners and in cooperation with Porcelain Augarten, which are one of the two oldest porcelain manufacturers in Austria. So this is Schloss Holleneck. I think maybe, Katie, you want to go ahead and have the first question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could tell us about your residency and how it came about.
Okay, so this is Schloss Holleneck, which happens to be where I live and where we have started this Designers in Residency program. And Katie was a designer in residence last year. So the way that it works is that designers are invited over the summer. They spend a couple of weeks and they really try and immerse themselves in the place and get inspired by the history of the place and come up with a project to a given theme. Now, Katie, you actually didn't come in the summer. You came in the autumn and then in the winter. And you didn't stay just a few weeks. You came twice. And I think altogether you stayed probably like 5 weeks. Is that right?
That's right, yep. Speaking about table manners, I'm always someone to just invite myself back.
Well, it was lovely to have you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your own personal experience as a designer in residence in Holleneck?
Definitely. Okay, so I was originally supposed to come in November to the castle, and the idea is that I was going to be at the castle sort of like rummaging around for a week, right? And then I'd spend, or like a week and a half or two, and then go to Augarten and paint these plates based on a design that I'd come up with sort of in collaboration with Alice based on the theme and the experience at the castle. But I did this in January and not November, so, which was amazing, I think, because as opposed to living in like the designer like apartment in the castle, I got to live.
So what you see now actually on the screen, that's right at the front, there's the North Tower. So that's a tower where the designers have their own apartment, but it's not a heated tower. So Katie actually had to really live with us, with my family, which meant that my kids absolutely adore her. And because obviously in January, it would have been too cold to send her to the tower.
Couldn't be sent to the tower. So I stayed in the, like the main living quarters, I guess, in the castle, which I thought was really amazing. So it also meant though that it was like very difficult to rummage around the castle because most of it isn't heated, which is something I had never even thought about because like how could someone afford to do that? So I basically, tell me if I'm like remembering this correctly. We went through some of the rooms and you had been cleaning off like your massive collection of porcelain, which I thought was so cool, especially because I love seeing things when they're like in their pre-curated state. Just like,
yeah, so what we had done is we had emptied a whole room for another designer in residence. So we had emptied completely a room and we were restoring the room, repainting it. And we had taken out all the porcelain collection. And the interesting thing was actually, I myself didn't really know what we had there. And as we were both, and all these porcelain pieces were just like lying on the tables in a different room. And I remember the two of us were going through it and suddenly like discovering for the first time what was there. And actually we both found out that there were quite a few Augarten pieces, which we didn't even, I mean, I didn't know about, because this is a collection that has been here in Hollenig for probably 2 generations already.
That was the cool.
That was probably like a very inspiring, like just looking at the other porcelain was something that was inspiring to you.
Completely. And I think that's where I got the idea where I was like, okay, the patterns I want to make on the plates like definitely cannot be the same.
Like in the sense of like you were trying to do like every piece would be different, and it wouldn't have like a running, well, you definitely had a running theme, but not every plate would be the same.
Yeah, exactly. It was like everyone's invited to the party.
It's a very inclusive way of approaching a service, isn't it?
Yes.
So do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience at Augarten? So maybe we can just tell briefly that Augarten, as I said before, is the second oldest porcelain manufacturer in Europe, the first one being Meissen, and they're based in Vienna. And they have some very old-fashioned and traditional motifs, but they also have a tradition of doing very contemporary objects with all sorts of different designers. So what was it like for you arriving at Augarten?
Well, let's see. So I'd come up with, there were like a few questions that I had about the process of the plates. Like, I wasn't sure if I was going to be painting them myself, or if they were, or if like one of their painters were going to be. So I had sort of, that was like a big unknown. And it turned out that I was going to be painting them, which was amazing because I've never painted porcelain before. And so that was something that I had to figure out, like how to translate these designs and the ideas I had come up with in the castle. So these were some of my inspiration. I was really into this ribbon motif.
So these are 2 historical Augarten pieces, which are there in their museum. So where there's a factory, there's also a museum. So you had access to like historical pieces. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes. Oh, you're so much better at this than me. I'm like, well, here are the so I really liked these cups and saucers and the motifs on them, specifically the ribbon and the clouds. I liked the combination of this really sort of traditional motif of a ribbon, but I wanted to sort of like just drop it on the plate and have it be a little sloppy and have each pattern be different and have it and I just like, who doesn't love clouds? They're so ethereal, mysterious.
So you said that it was very different for you to be painting on porcelain, but you do work extensively and you work a lot with ceramics. So maybe could you like give us a little bit an idea of how your work and your methodology normally is, and why was this so different?
So typically when I'm working with ceramics, I build the ceramics myself, and everything is really lumpy. So this was like a complete contrast, like not building the form myself and having it be very smooth. It was completely different. And then also focusing on the surface of it was something I hadn't done before. So I felt it was cool because I was like obviously really uncomfortable. I was like in this very traditional place. I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never like thought about surface treatment in this way before.
Maybe we need to explain a little bit that at Augarten, the painters, they work in a kind of very ceremonious silence. And most of them have been working there for something between 10 and 20 years. And it takes them several weeks to just get one plate done.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I also didn't know that they were going to put me in what they call the paintery with all of the other painters from Augarten. So it was like, they gave me a little table next to this very lovely man who helped me a lot, thankfully, because I didn't know how to mix the pigment. But he was like painting the same little like flower motif and he had been like painting the same motif for like 30 years. And here I come and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like watercolor painting all over
your hand. How did it feel? Because I think it's something you said before, which was really interesting, is you mentioned about the fact that you build the form. And if I remember correctly, I remember you telling me once at a gallery show of yours that you give a lot of freedom also to the people working with you in the studio to really decorate the way that they do. So I have a feeling what you normally do is a lot more about doing the shape, and then the surface is actually whatever happens. It's a little bit more of a kind of chaos. Whereas here you really had the opposite. It's like the shape was given and you had to take a lot of care in how the surface was being worked.
Completely. That's such a good point, because so typically how I work, I'm like, I love working with people and I love like, I don't know, I call it like ushering them into existence and not totally controlling like every aspect of something, because that's just like, you can't control every aspect. So that would just be terrible. And B, like all of this amazing, unexpected stuff happens when you just like let it happen. So for this, yeah, like I had like it felt at first like a constraint, like a very rigid framework. Like this is like on the floor here, this is at the castle, and I'm like trying to figure out like what design I'm going to use.
This is the shape of the plates that you were painting. So maybe we just want to add that this shape is actually, it's not called the Liechtenstein shape anymore, but it was made to start with for the Liechtenstein. So that's the reason why we chose together this shape. And you were very obsessed with this idea of the ribbon, and you were taking lots of pictures with ribbons and plates.
I was very obsessed because, okay, also just to like back up, like I still, at this point, I wasn't sure whether or not like I was going to be painting them or if they were going to be painting them. So then I was like, oh, it'd be so funny if they had to paint like my drawings just like so tediously. But then I was like, oh, we have to like leave a lot of white space on it, or it'd be like so expensive to have them paint it. So this was me just like playing around with like an idea that was also economically feasible by like creating little microcosms on just like one part of the plate.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the technique then works? How are the colors? How are the paints? What's a real technical challenge of it all?
Well, okay, every part of it is a technical challenge. So like I couldn't even mix the pigment. Like so basically what it is, it's like this dry pigment, and it's like
they make their own pigments. So the pigments are the kind of like their own recipe, aren't they?
Yeah, which right now is like such a pain for me, because I want to be porcelain, like painting in my studio, and I've like purchased all of these porcelain paints, and none of them are the same quality as the Our Garden porcelain paint, and I'm like, how do I get the recipe?
Yes, I guess that's something that a lot of people don't actually realize, and that's exactly when you start like working with it, is then suddenly you realize, okay, that's why, you know, an Our Garden plate costs so much, and that's what the special value about it is, that the quality of the paint is so incredible because they've been using this secret recipe. And that's why, you know, the brilliance of the color and why it lasts so long, and that's something that very often we're not aware of.
Yeah, I mean,
that you're noticing that right now.
It's painful. Like I've been going on Etsy and like buying like vintage vials of porcelain paint that people I think would buy for like decoration, but I'm like, maybe if I like get an older recipe, it'll be better.
It will be better.
And I'm like becoming this like mad, like toiling scientist in my studio. Anyway.
So here we have on the screen, we have some versions of different plates with different ribbons. These are not final yet, but this, you can see how you were like experimenting with different patterns and different colors as well.
Yeah, so, and this is a good photo because you can sort of see the little like tools around the table. So basically okay, so the pigment is mixed, and it's like mixed with like these oils, and they just do it on like a piece of glass with like a palette knife. And the way, I wish Frank was his name. He was the really nice man who sat next to me and mixed my pigments. And Frank would like, the way his hand and wrist move was just like, and every morning I would come in and he would have like already mixed my pigments, and there'd be like a little plate over it, and I was always so late. And so the pigments had been sitting there for like hours, and then he'd have to like remix them because all of the pigment had already sunk to the bottom of the oil. And then basically you just like take a little brush, like this high quality brush of squirrel hair.
Oh.
And yeah, it's squirrel hair. It's like Siberian squirrel hair.
Okay.
Fun fact. And it really just like holds the oil so well, and so you can get this like consistent, like these consistent marks, I guess. So what I would do is like, typically I think what they do is like they make sure when they paint, like it's such like an even layer of paint, but I made mine I started treating it like watercolor because I like couldn't, it just was like too tedious otherwise. And it just like allowed me to make these forms without thinking too much. So that was my approach, treating it more like watercolor.
I think that's interesting. It's like, make do and see how it works for you best, isn't it? So I guess that's a kind of a much more intuitive way of doing it, and just obtaining a result anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I spent like the first 2 days, I think, painting the same plate and then just wiping it off, and then painting it and then wiping it off.
I think that's something which is interesting to explain, is like the color, you can always rub it off as long as you want.
Yeah, as long before it's fired, you can always rub it off. And so there are these like little, in the middle photo, you can see all these little Q-tips, or 2 Q-tips, but I would like use those to like clean around. And
did that make you though want to be like more perfectionist, the fact that you could rub it off? Because I remember like at the beginning, obviously whenever you start a project, the beginning is always much slower as you try to figure out which direction you want to go, and you're trying to like find your own voice or your own style. But I really remember like towards the end, especially the second time that you came back, you were so much more quicker because you really kind of knew how to do it. But also maybe you had given up on this idea that the first week you had this comparison of Frank next to you painting with such a precise technique, and then by the second time you came, it was like, oh, I'm Katie, I'm not Frank, I'll just do it my own way. So you kind of achieved a kind of freedom, and you were so quick in the way that you churned out pieces.
Oh my gosh, so much faster the second time. Like the first week, I've got to say, it was really challenging because like the environment was like so traditional, and Austrians are like very, they're not like super warm.
That's why we've got hold of COVID so quickly, because no one hugs anyway here.
That's such a good point. Oh my God.
Yeah, I tell you. They are masters of social distancing anyway. Everyone is so happy that they don't have to shake hands or kiss or hug, because it just doesn't come naturally to them anyway.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah. So anyway, because of all of those reasons, I was sort of like, oh, what am I doing here? And I was like by myself in Vienna in a little Airbnb, and I just couldn't make myself be on time, which they did not like.
They were not very happy about that. But
No.
do you feel that the way that you worked, how was that seen? Was that because I don't think they were critical towards the work that you did in the end, and I think, do you think it inspired them to also have a different approach?
I think it inspired them to have a different approach toward me. Like, I think at the beginning, they were like, who is this person? What is this? Like, they don't do this other thing. They don't do residencies there, really. Mm-hmm. Like, this was so abnormal for them. Like, they do residencies, like, where they, like, cast forms for artists, I think sometimes. But this was, like, completely unusual. Mm-hmm. So I think they were, like, really confused at the beginning. They were like, what is she doing? Like, how is she painting these? And I think once I got comfortable with what I was doing and like with being there, I like really struck a stride, and I was like, oh, like this is amazing. This is like an experience and I'm never gonna be able to have it again. So I started just going like really fast and intuitively and just like not sort of like more how I work in my studio at home.
Yeah.
And then I started like buying porcelain, like they're like just plain porcelain, so I could just keep painting more and more and more, which is why I ended up coming back a second time. So
Yeah. So here we have some more pictures of
okay.
other plates, and you chose also to work with gold. So at the beginning you were experimenting with a lot of colors, and then you reduced your color palette, but then you decided to add the gold. Why was the gold important to you? What did it reference?
Well, I use a lot of gold in my work at home, either way, gold luster. So it just felt natural. And what I really like about the gold, sort of like what we were talking about earlier with the like framework of the plate, like the plate's pretty rigid. And what I like about the gold, when you put it on the trim, it like it gives it another form. It sort of like creates a different framework and like breaks it in a way. So I like that the ribbon like breaks the edge of the plate, and then the luster kind of changes the edge of it as well. And I think another reason why I like using the gold is because there's something really, especially in the context of our garden, like something subversive about using it the way that I used it.
Well, it's now that you mentioned the word subversive, do you want to tell us a little bit about how, maybe I should tell a little bit about the theme of last year's exhibition.
Oh, yes.
These plays were presented here in Schloss Hollenig exactly a year ago, and the exhibition was called Ad Mensam, so at the table. And the idea of the whole exhibition was to really question why we sit at the table. And although in theory we all sit at the table to, you know, eat, in fact we sit at the table because we want to have a sort of communion with other people. We want to share the food. We come to the table to have a communication, to have a conversation. So we had 20 projects, and they really were exploring rituals at the table, eating habits, conversation at the table. We had tables, we had chairs, we had plates, tablecloths, glasses. So we really had a wide range of objects. And the idea was just to have the objects as conversation pieces. And so in this context, what was your approach to the theme, and what did you feel about the theme, and what was your idea about table manners or table rituals?
I guess I've always really been interested in like sort of like scraps and like the left behinds and leftovers and like the rapscallions and the outliers. And so I wanted this to feel like really inclusive, which is why they're all like different. And I also wanted it to feel like every time the table was set, it could be set in a different way. It would always be like you'd always have something new to find. And it was sort of inspired by like, yeah, like the pieces that you like drop on the floor, you find under the table. And it wasn't necessarily about just like what was happening within the table, but also beyond.
So how was this inspired by in some way by the way that it was at the table in your childhood, or when you were younger, or at home? How was that? How did that inspire, or how did that fit in the narrative?
Well, okay, definitely. I feel like when I was younger at the table, it was always like, Tintin's ready. And then we'd like all sit at the table and pretend to be like this normal nuclear family. And it was like so far from that. And I was like always just like completely distracted and like looking at other things. And so I think that definitely, I thought about that a lot while making this.
Yeah. And then I remember you mentioned also something which I really liked at the time. I mean, I still do, but it kind of like, it really made a lot of sense about having a perfect hostess as a role model, and the fact that very often a perfect hostess is so busy preparing everything that she forgets to eat and forgets to enjoy. And you wanted to make these plates for the kind of rebel hostess who just has a lot of fun hosting people and doesn't really care about if things were perfect and everything is right.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, these plates are about enjoyment and about pleasure, and I hope that's like what I want them to inspire. Because yeah, like you said, I feel like oftentimes people are so obsessed with like the perfect placement, especially when it's like porcelain. People are like, oh, it has to be perfect, and then you're like, no, it's fine.
I think what we're missing right now is a little bit of a close-up, because actually the plates, if you look at them from afar, they kind of can look, they don't look subversive. But then there's a lot of little naked women hidden around. So I think that's an interesting, because that obviously goes back to a lot of your work, your lamps and your wallpaper. So you've done a lot of work with a naked female figure. What does that represent for you?
The nude figure.
Yeah, and why did you choose to include that in your plates? There you go. Okay, so we have these ones. These are perfect.
That's subtle. So, these ones sort of like came after the ribbons. On the ribbons, I was like trying to like hide all these little images so that it would look like a traditional motif and something like just something that would be on a ribbon, or I don't know. But then when you like dive deeper, there are like little nude women floating around, and I remember painting like one like dog with boobs, and I was like just like little secrets. And then yeah, these ones are more overt and like more in line with like the lamps and some of like the larger, or some of like the sculptures that I make in my studio. I love these. I mean, it sort of goes back to like the show I had at R like 3 years ago called Side Dish. And it's sort of like a jab at like women being like a dish served up.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously kind of like rebelling against it.
And how did do you want to tell us a little bit about the lattice behind the plates as well? Because that's also like a theme that you had. Yeah, there we go. So we have all the right images now.
Oh yeah.
It's also like a pattern that really inspired you.
Yeah, I don't know. I loved the woven patterns on the Our Garden, on some of the Our Garden forms. Sort of this like trompe l'oeil weaving, and it's like, why would you I just thought this cup was so funny, because like, why would you have porcelain and then make it look like this sort of like countryside motif? I don't know, but anyway,
I guess it's a very recurring theme in the Our Garden porcelain, because you remember there's some porcelain which is painted to look like marble, and then other like wood, and then here we have the wicker. So it was a kind of way by these artists to like show their mastery and play with this trompe l'oeil effect.
Totally. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting, because they obviously are like so proud of the porcelain, and then painting it to be a different material, like to reflect a different materiality, I think is fascinating. So I was really taken by this like woven pattern. And so I started like doing these little paintings of lattices. Mm-hmm. And what I was inspired by was the bedroom. There's a bedroom in Alice's castle all of the bedrooms are amazing. And the castle is incredible, because like each room reflects kind of like a different era. But anyway, there's this one bedroom, the green room, right?
Yeah, the blue room, which happens to be green.
Oh yeah, there's the blue room turned green because of the sun.
Yeah. This is a room which what's actually interesting is the room is completely paneled by fabric, and the fabric has turned from a very deep blue into a kind of moss green over the years. And what we were always told, and what I always assumed, was that that was a reaction to the sun, because if you look, it is a reaction to the light, to the UV light. But what we'd always assumed was because the natural pigment had just faded. And if you take away the paintings, you can see behind the original color. What I've actually discovered recently is that this fabric is one of the very first chemical colors, pigments. So it was one of the first artificial pigments to be used. And because the first ones were so unstable, that's why the color has faded so much.
That is so.
It's not because the colors are natural, it's because the colors are chemical colors. So it's quite interesting.
That's so cool.
But as you were saying, there is this this window.
Okay, so there's this window in the room, and it looks out over this like ballroom, right? It's a ballroom.
Yes, it looks down on the Saal, on the main hall. Yeah.
Which is like it's a ballroom. It's like this insanely painted, like marble trompe l'oeil, like frescoes on the ceiling. It's just insane. Anyway, there's this little window in this room, and you can like peek out and look down on it. So you can be like, oh, is like Sally, who I want to dance with, down there? Or is it a cool time? Should I go? Is it worth it? And it's just it's like a built-in peeping Tom aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's behind the door, so you don't even see it. And then it was really made to look down on what was happening while people were having dinner or having a party or whatever. So yes, it's definitely a spying little window, and it has this lattice shape, and that was something that inspired you.
Yeah, I love the lattice shape on it, and like all of the different, like how the room was like layered behind the lattice, and this like idea, it just worked with the idea of like, well, it really inspired the idea of like layering and like these layers of plates and like layers of patterns. So I really like ran with this lattice.
How important, obviously in this project, the historical aspect of being inspired, here we have the examples of the lattice on the plates. So obviously when designers come to work at Schloss Hollenig and they're designers in residence, the historical aspect is always very important. It's something that they really have to try and include in their own work. So for you also in this project, being inspired by our Garten tradition, being inspired by Schloss Hollenig was a very big part of developing the project. But how important is the historical referencing in your work normally? Is it something that you do consciously, you do it subconsciously, you're not aware of? How do you feel towards that?
I feel like it's all of those things. Like in this, it was like a cognizant part of the process and the design. But I find that sometimes, most of the time, when I design something and I'm like, and this is why it is designed this way, because of like this historical design, and I'm influenced by this, and it's like feels really rigid, and I feel like I have to like stick to it. Something about it just like dies. So I like to use, like, I obviously
that happens when, I think that happens when the historical reference hasn't been fully integrated or digested. So it's just kind of like, you're quoting something, but it hasn't really been assimilated in a way that something new has come out of it.
Yeah, like it needs to be like masticated and like chewed up and like put back out. Speaking of
very appropriate to table manners.
I know. I was joking that I wanted to like bring a big bag of Doritos and just like eat them the entire time and like lick my fingers. But you're welcome. I
guess it's a bit early in the day for you.
It is. It is a bit early. Okay, so this is my practice plate. Oh, my trusty little practice plate. That's why oh no, on the right is my practice plate. Okay, so I started painting these lattices, and this I actually find really interesting because I like this was a design that I created like at the castle, and I'd sort of like left it behind for the ribbon, and then it ended up working perfectly. So I'd paint
You
these.
actually managed to combine two different patterns and put this kind of grid pattern together with a ribbon.
Yes, exactly. But what I loved about this was painting the lattice and then taking this like oily, like can I not think of the word for rag? An oily rag, and like wipe away where I wanted the clouds to go. And like the wiping process would almost like make the cloud. That makes sense.
Okay. So you were like smudging it.
Yeah, I was smudging it.
Okay, I get it. I think we have another picture further on where we can see the other plates. Okay. This is another reference that you've added. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah. So when I was in Vienna, I was like obviously surrounded by all of these like traditional architectural features, traditional art. Like I don't know. But I could like sense that there was like a deep freakiness to Austrian culture, but I like couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was like, all of these sphinxes just have like the perkiest boobs. Like everything's a boob. And I just was like, there is like a deep freakdom here. And then I went to this opening for this artist I had never heard of called Addersay. And I was like, oh, he sums it up so perfectly. And I was just really excited by the exhibition, and like his paintings, these are from like the 60s and 70s on the right. And I just found it, I had already been painting like my plates. I was like basically wrapping up the second visit, and I saw these and I was like, oh, a kindred spirit. And I just thought it was interesting that there are so many similar motifs and references. And so I just wanted to show it.
Okay. As one of the kind of kindred spirits in Austria that you found.
Yes.
I think if we go ahead now with the slides, so these are more plates. So we have again the naked figures. We have here the grids and the clouds, and we have a ribbon. How many plates did you do in total?
Well, I was supposed to do 18 and I did 21, just to like throw a little wrench in there. Like 18, I don't know.
You also painted other things, didn't you?
Yes. So then I was like, I can't just stop at plates. And I started painting vases and like various things from like their shop. And I love this one because on the left, you can see like my little grid with like the drips next to their like perfectly executed leaf motif. And then this is, I also like the one on the right because you can see like the little zone that I was sitting in, and like behind the vase on the right is like this little table with the glass, with like the little.
This was your working station behind that, wasn't it?
What?
This was your working station behind it.
Yeah, my working station, and then Frank's working station.
And you also did like egg cups and teacups and different size vases.
Yeah, so I did like everything. I did like a Mozart head that I tried to.
This is I missed that one. I didn't see that one.
Well, that's so bad. I was like, okay, I'm going to contour Mozart's face to look like a Kardashian. And it didn't work.
I'm not surprised I missed that. I'm not surprised.
I think I showed you and you were just like, no.
No, I don't need that. That doesn't fit in with the theme. We can go on. We can see some other pictures, the vases.
Okay, so this one was amazing because this was a floor. These are 2 floor vases, and I was like buying all of these little porcelain pieces with like my money, and they were giving me like a generous discount, but I could not afford the floor vases. They were just like so much money, but I really wanted to paint one. And so I asked the owner, I was like, listen, if you give me a vase, I will paint you a vase and we can barter. And he was like, okay. And so, like, I don't know, a few days before I was going to leave the second time, they like card up these 2 floor vases for me, and everyone in the paintery is like, what? Like, what are you doing? These take like 6 months to paint. And I was like, hold it. I was like, I'm gonna finish by the end of the day. And this was like when I was like really in my groove. And so I started painting these like medieval inspired critters all over them, which was sort of the beginning of my little foray into like human animal hybrids. And I just loved painting them.
Have you taken this theme? Have you explored this theme further on in different work as well?
Yeah, so this is like the beginning of, I've started doing like lamps that are sort of like mythological creatures or medieval creatures, combinations of like human and animals, but sort of like ignoring the stories and like kind of creating my own to go with them. Like I'm working on a poodle person right now. I love this. And I love, there's a joy. I'm just remembering, there's a joy unlike any other painting on super smooth porcelain with a high quality pigment.
And a beautiful squirrel brush.
And a beautiful Siberian squirrel brush. So Alice, I just need to thank you.
Katie, I have one question. So it's like, talking about the residency, yeah? So just talking more generally about residencies, because I know you've done other kind of residencies as well. What do you think it's the importance of having a residency, and what does it bring to a designer, and why is it important for you to have one? What are the things that are like, you know, that make residency worthwhile?
Residencies are amazing because it just like gets you out of this environment that you're really comfortable in and into a different one where you learn something new. You're in a different environment, you're around different people, like they're challenging, and you're away from home. Like when I had just gotten engaged when I came to our, like literally the night before, and then I was like, bye Jeff, see you in 3 weeks. And I just think there's something really, that is such like a healthy experience just on a human level, and then on like a professional or creative level, it's just so expansive. And then I don't know, like you create all of these like personal connections. Like Alice, we're so close now because of this. And I remember like I remember when we first met at Nina Johnson's show, Miami. I was like giving you a tour, and I don't know if it was like at the dinner or at the opening, but you were like, you know, I really was resisting coming here and seeing this show. It just doesn't really fit with the program. But after meeting you,
I have to say, before meeting you, I found your work very different from the kind of work that we have here in Hollenig and the way that the program is developed. So I think it also had to do, you know, with maybe not perceiving the expansion of what your work could be, and also the fact that I couldn't really see this kind of historical transformation. So that was something that, you know, I was kind of like, okay, I'm not sure this is this designer is making things which would fit in the context of Schloss Hollenig. But that's also something that I'm aware of. It's like you need to meet the people. And I think when we met, then as we were talking, I could see the potential of how much other things you could be doing. And I think when we then found the project to collaborate on, and the fact that there was a company involved, and that there was something a little bit more constructed around it, then it suddenly it felt perfect. And we both, I mean, I certainly enjoyed it. I know I feel like you did as well. So I think I think the collaboration worked well, because then we were both getting a little bit out of our comfort zone as well. So from my side, what I know is that designers then push me to do things that are not maybe my first choice, or sometimes they're not even my taste. And it doesn't really matter, because if the outcome is well thought, then the projects are always they're always really inspiring.
Yeah, I have a question for you about that just popped up in my head. I've always wondered about how, someone who's like a curator or a gallerist, how they can like put aside their own taste to see, to sort of like, yeah, how do you like put aside your own taste to show pieces and show
Which
what?
are relevant. I think there's different ways. I think it is a little bit an illusion to completely put away your taste. I think that's something that it doesn't. You're not always going to succeed. Yeah, I mean, I think at some point you just have to accept that you do have preferences, and they are going to transpire in your work. The way that it helps is obviously is having a theme. If you have a theme and you're looking for something specific and you have a strong narrative, then your personal taste doesn't get in the way, because what you're trying to do is really tell a story, show a methodology, show how people are working. So I think that really helps. And then I think it's about the quality of the work. If you can understand why the designer is doing things in a specific way, what their ambition is, what their aim is, what they're trying to do, then whether you like the end result from an aesthetic point of view becomes completely irrelevant. And I have to be perfectly honest, I'm not in love with every single project that has come out of Schloss Holleneck. There are some which I like better aesthetically than others, but I feel that every single project has a really strong value for what it tells and for the process that's gone into it. And because they were all made for the space, for the exhibition. So I don't have a favorite, even if there are some which I think are more beautiful than others. What are you going to say?
I was like, except for these.
Except for these. But because we're in the talk now.
So the talking about taste, it reminded. I have another question for you after this, but I just want to bring up the fact that I feel like this project was something that pushed me. Like making things that are beautiful, or like these are beautiful, and not, we can just say objectively, and making something that is like beautiful was definitely out of like my comfort zone. And this experience like made me really be like, like this is the most subversive thing I can do, is like make something beautiful. And B, it's like really inspired a lot of my work moving forward. Like I love like making things that have like really delicate moments now. And that, yeah, I have like this experience to thank for. But what I wanted to ask you is, one of the things that struck me about the castle and about the residency is like how cool it is that all of these sort of like contemporary designs live, like you will acquire some of the work and then it will live in the castle forever. And it's just like the coolest juxtaposition. And I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on that.
Yeah, so that's something that has become over time. So I have to admit, when I first started like redecorating Holleneck, and we started like putting electricity in and heating in and fixing and restoring, I had for me was a real challenge to have to deal with the historical furniture, and I'd always imagined myself in a kind of white cube modern loft with a futon and 5 pieces of white furniture kind of thing. So it was a very, very different kind of grandeur and style. And I think you kind of acquire a courage in mixing the different styles and mixing contemporary with traditional or historical furniture. And I think the rule number one is, if things are good quality, if they're made well, if they are thought out, and then everything fits. And I think I'm definitely getting more brave and more courageous as I develop also in the work I'm doing here. And I don't feel like, I always just think now, oh, it will work out in some way. And I think the real meter is quality. I think that's when things just fit together, if they're well made, if they are well thought out. And so I'm not as scared as I used to be. And I think also the way that Hollenig was built, it was built over several centuries, and every owner added something to it, and every generation put something else. So in a way, it felt very natural to bring in contemporary design into the castle, because that's part of what we are nowadays. So it felt, like the same way that in the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, they put in like a lift, and they put in, the heating. And then in the 19th century, they went neo-Gothic in style. And the centuries before, it was the Baroque. And, now it just feels like right to be really having a conversation about contemporary design.
Oh my gosh, I just loved walking through the castle and going through like the Renaissance room, and then like just try, like, because all of the rooms are like connected. So you can just like walk through them. It's like walking through design history.
Except that all the pieces are kind of mumbled together. And the other exciting thing is sometimes you think something is really precious and old, and then it turns out to be a complete fake. But somehow it did. And then there are other things which you don't think are particularly, valuable, and then it turns out to be, something really old and original and rare. So it's a kind of like guessing what things are as well, which I think is quite fun.
And tell me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that's unusual about Schloss Hollenig is that it's like intact, like really intact in terms of the fact that it still has like a lot of the furniture, the original furniture.
I think that's what's something which is quite extraordinary, is the fact that every room is full, and every drawer is full, and there have been several generations of people who just like hoarding. So whenever I try to throw anything away, it's definitely no, you can't, just keep it and just put it somewhere. So there really is a lot of things. I think we're coming closely to the end, because we've only got a few more minutes. So I don't know if there are any questions from our audience, and if anyone wants to ask Katie about her work. I think we have 1 or 2 slides maybe that we can just quickly show. Oh, there's only one more left.
And this is when Alice officiated my wedding.
So let's see if we have any questions. Do we have any questions from anyone? Otherwise, Katie, you can tell us about why you decided to include this picture.
I'll just go ahead and tell why I decided to include this picture. Well, it just shows that Alice and I have personally come a long way from the first time that we met at Nina Johnson Gallery. And also the dress that I designed with Ashley Leamer for the wedding was like a post Our Garden design. Like, this wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for.
So we have a question from Natalie Kovacs, who actually says that this shot makes the cake. So she obviously appreciates the Our Garden influence on your wedding dress. And she also would like to know, what is your dream project?
Oh my God. Okay. So my dream.
That's a tough question.
What?
That's a tough question.
But I have the answer. Okay.
Oh, well.
My dream project right now, and something that I like cannot stop thinking about, is creating a sculpture garden. So Jeff and I are like currently in the process of looking for like property at State.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because I want to have like sort of like a rogue Storm King where I like make some massive work myself. Because you know what? Here's the thing. I want to do public sculpture, but I'm like, I don't want to like wait for someone to commission it. So I'm just gonna like go ahead and build it myself.
I think that's the best way of doing it. But then the first thing that we need to do as soon as you can fly back to Europe is I'll have to take you to the Giardino dei Tarocchi, which Niki de Sanfal did in Tuscany, because that's very close to where I used to spend my summers as a child. And it used to be like the outing that we did every other year. It was to go and visit it. And it's a pretty extraordinary place.
I need to go. I've like scoured the internet of all of the images. And I was like, yes. Also, another really cool one is like Postman Cheval's Palace.
Yes.
That one is so cool. Like I'd be totally fine just like isolating myself and like building myself a palace out of garbage.
Okay, well, that's definitely a good dream project, I would say. Is there so Natalie was asking what park, and it's the Giardini dei Tarocchi by Niki de Sanfal, and it's in the Maremma.
It's incredible. It's like all of these giant mosaic pieces.
Wait, let me just spell Giardino dei Tarocchi. So the Tarocchi are the tarots, are the cards. So actually the way that the garden is conceived is that she has taken inspiration from all the tarot's cards and all the figures on the tarot's cards. So you have the moon and the sun, and you have, now I don't know all the figures unfortunately, but there's death and then there's love. So that was a little bit the inspiration, and she actually built it herself. So yes, Katie, I think that sounds like a very good project. So at this point, I think if there are oh look, Anka is also saying hello. She says, no question, just saying hi, love the chat, and loved meeting Katie in Vienna. So
Anka saved me in Vienna. Just saying. Such like a breath
I think we're coming to the end of this lovely talk, and I'd like to thank again R & Company for hosting us. I'd like to thank the team at R & Company for putting together the slideshow and helping Katie and I manage the technical issues. And Katie, it's been wonderful talking to you. It feels like we're almost in the same room. And
we're even watching.
I look forward to meeting in real life again once we can all travel happily again.
It'll be a great day.